I never thought booking a place through Airbnb would end up being the worst decision of my life. It was meant to be a quiet weekend getaway, a break from the grind of work, a chance to escape the city. I found a secluded cabin up in the hills near a small town in Vermont. The listing was simple enough, just a cozy cabin with a hot tub, a fireplace, and privacy guaranteed. The reviews were glowing. People spoke about how peaceful it was, how perfect for unwinding. But something about it felt too perfect. I was already driving up there when I realized I hadn't received the key code for the cabin yet. I'd messaged the host earlier that day, but she hadn't responded. No big deal, right? I thought, just a little bump in the road. I got to the cabin around dusk, its outline barely visible against the thick forests surrounding it. The silence was overwhelming, almost suffocating. There wasn't another house in sight. I tried calling the host again. No answer. Frustrated, I went to the cabin's porch and took in the surroundings. The air was crisp, the trees whispered with the wind, and the last slivers of sunlight barely pierced through the thick clouds. This was supposed to be calming, but there was a knot in my stomach I couldn't shake. I went inside, hoping to at least start unpacking. The door creaked as I opened it, and the scent of old wood hit me. It wasn't a bad smell, just off. A weird mix of mildew and something else I couldn't place. The interior was just as advertised, rustic, with a large stone fireplace, old-fashioned furniture, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a cabin from a bygone era. I sent a few more messages to the host, trying to stay calm. As I stepped further into the living room, I noticed something strange, a second set of keys on the counter, next to a folded note. Curious, I unfolded the note. It was a short message, hastily written, and it made my skin crawl. Don't trust the neighbors. They're always watching. At first, I thought it was some weird joke, a creepy thing meant to add flavor to the cabin. But something about the note felt too real, too desperate. I tried calling the host one more time. Still no answer. But that wasn't the worst part. It was then I heard it, a faint knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. And certainly not this soon. I stood frozen, unsure whether to answer. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice. Hey, you in there? The voice was deep, gravelly, almost unnatural. I hesitated. There was no way this was the host. She hadn't responded to my calls, and this wasn't listed as a shared space. What the hell was going on? I cautiously approached the door, peeking through the crack in the blinds. A man stood on the porch, staring directly at the window. He was tall, dressed in a worn-out jacket, and there was something in his eyes, something cold. I didn't answer. I wasn't about to invite some stranger into the cabin. The man knocked once more, then turned and disappeared into the forest. I didn't know what to think. I went back to the counter, hoping to distract myself, when I saw something else. A small, black and white photograph of the cabin. I didn't recognize the people in the picture, two men standing in front of the cabin, their faces blank, their eyes locked in an unsettling stare. Behind them, the cabin looked almost different. Newer. More alive. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. The hairs on my neck stood on end. That night, I slept fitfully, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant hoot of an owl. The feeling of being watched never left me. But as the darkness pressed in, I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. That note? Probably just some twisted prank. The strange knock. Maybe just a neighbor. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And it wasn't until the next morning that I realized just how far things would go. But that's a story for another time. The morning after the strange encounter with the man on the porch, I awoke to a feeling of dread that I couldn't shake. The cabin was too quiet, unnervingly so. I could feel it in my bones, something was out of place. I went through my usual morning routine, though every move felt robotic, like I was trying to keep up appearances when my gut told me I should leave. The air outside was thick with fog, wrapping the cabin in an eerie embrace. I decided to step out onto the porch, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. That's when I saw him again. The man from the night before. He stood near the edge of the forest, watching me. His back was to the trees, but his head turned just enough that I could see his eyes. They weren't human eyes. There was a coldness there, something devoid of life. A slow shiver ran down my spine as I stared back at him, but he didn't move. Just stood there. Watching. I wanted to call out, to ask if he needed something, but my throat felt tight, the words lodged in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, the man slowly turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the mist. I stood there for a long time, my mind racing. Was he one of the neighbors? What the hell did he want? I snapped out of my thoughts and rushed inside to grab my phone. I had to call the host again, but this time, I decided to call the police. This wasn't right. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I did. 911, what's your emergency? I tried to steady my voice. I'm at a cabin in the woods, and there's a man who's been watching me. I don't know if he's dangerous, but I'm starting to feel unsafe. Where are you exactly? The operator asked, her tone neutral but firm. I gave her the address I had from the Airbnb listing, trying to keep my composure. The operator told me they'd send someone out to check things out. It wasn't much, but it made me feel slightly better. But then, just as I hung up, the sound of a vehicle engine rumbled from the distance. It was too early for anyone to be around. No one was supposed to be here. I grabbed my bag, my heart pounding in my chest as I rushed to the window. A black pickup truck appeared out of the mist, its headlights cutting through the fog like a pair of glowing eyes. It pulled up to the front of the cabin and stopped. A man in a uniform stepped out. I could just make out the badge on his chest as he approached the door. I exhaled in relief. The police. Thank God. I hurried to open the door, but before I could, the man knocked. It was a hard, deliberate knock, as if he was trying to make a statement. I opened the door cautiously, not wanting to let any more strangers inside, but I needed answers. "Hi, I'm Officer Smith," he said, his voice flat, eyes scanning me for a moment. "You called about the man in the woods?" I nodded. "Yes, I've been seeing him. He's been watching me. I don't know who he is, but he looks off. Like he doesn't belong here." Officer Smith took a step back and looked around. "We've had some reports of strange activity around this area, especially with properties like yours. People have mentioned similar things. Could you show me where you saw him?" I pointed to the edge of the forest where I had seen him standing earlier. "Right there." He was just standing, staring at the cabin. The officer nodded, his face unreadable. "Stay inside. I'll take a look around." As soon as he turned and headed toward the woods, I closed the door behind me and locked it. I didn't know what I expected to happen, but I was beginning to feel like this was something much worse than just a strange neighbor. About 20 minutes passed. Then, I heard something. It wasn't the officer's footsteps, it was a thud, followed by a muffled shout. I rushed to the window, my heart racing. I saw Officer Smith on the ground, his hand gripping his radio. His face was pale, eyes wide in terror as he tried to crawl toward the truck. But before he could get any further, something moved in the fog. Something fast. It was him. The man from last night. He was moving toward the officer with terrifying speed, his face twisted into something grotesque. His eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, and his body moved like a predator stalking its prey. I couldn't breathe. I froze, unable to look away. I heard the officer scream just before he was dragged into the forest. The radio he had been clutching fell to the ground, crackling with static. Then, everything went silent. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty space where the officer had disappeared. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here anymore. The cabin, the man, the officer, it was all too much. I needed to leave, but I wasn't sure if it was safe to go. I quickly grabbed my things, threw them into the car, and started the engine. My hands shook as I put the car in gear. But as I drove down the dirt road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something was following me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its presence. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. Just the empty road behind me. Still, the feeling of being watched never left me. As I approached the town, I noticed something strange. The police lights were flashing in the distance. But they weren't moving. They were just there, standing still. I drove closer. And that's when I saw it. A dozen police cars were parked outside a house, the front yard illuminated by the blue and red lights. Officers were talking to each other, their faces grim. I could hear faint whispers of conversations, but none of them looked at me. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Officer Smith's radio was lying on the ground near the entrance of the house. It was still crackling with static. And above it, written in dark red letters, were 3 words that would haunt me forever. Don't trust them. I didn't stay long enough to find out more. I don't know how long I've been on the run. I don't know where to go. All I know is that I can never go back to that cabin. And the worst part? I'm not sure if I'm ever going to be safe again. Because that man, the one who's been watching me, he's still out there. And now, I'm certain of one thing, he's coming for me. I couldn't drive fast enough. I didn't know what I was running from, but something deep in my gut told me that staying in that cabin had been a death sentence. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man with the cold eyes in pursuit, but the road behind me stayed empty. No pickup truck, no figure lurking in the fog, just the endless stretch of road that led me deeper into the unknown. Eventually, I found myself in the small town near the cabin. It was quaint, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's name, but it felt wrong. The streets were quiet, eerily so, for a place that should have had at least some life. It was too quiet. Even the birds weren't singing. I parked the car in front of a small diner, the only building that seemed to be open. The faded sign said, Maggie's Diner. A flickering neon light buzzed above the door. I didn't know what to do next. I needed answers, and I needed to talk to someone. Maybe there was a way to make sense of all this. I stepped out of the car and approached the diner. My boots scraped against the cracked pavement, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I reached for the door, it swung open, and an elderly woman stepped out. Her face was wrinkled, her eyes tired, but there was something about her that made my skin crawl. She stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "You're the one, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft but heavy with something I couldn't quite place. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" She studied me closely, as if weighing the words carefully. "I saw the officer's radio earlier. He came out to check on you, didn't he?" I nodded, though my heart started to race again. "What happened to him?" "I saw, don't talk about it," she cut me off sharply. Her eyes darted toward the diner's entrance, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "Come inside. We'll talk there." I followed her inside, and the moment the door closed behind me, I realized how much quieter the diner was compared to the street. There was no hum of chatter, no clinking of silverware, just a tense silence that settled over everything. The woman led me to a booth in the back, away from the windows. As I sat, she handed me a cup of coffee without asking, her hand steady despite her frail appearance. She didn't speak immediately, just sat across from me, her eyes piercing through me like she could see everything. "Name's Maggie," she finally said, her voice low. "I run this diner. And I've seen things here, things most people don't want to talk about." I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it was hard. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew I wasn't getting out of here without answers. "The man. The one who's been following me. Who is he?" Maggie leaned forward, her gaze intense. "You should have left when you had the chance," she said quietly, almost regretfully. "You don't know what you've walked into." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked around the diner again, her eyes scanning the space like she was making sure no one else could hear. "That cabin you stayed in. It's not just a cabin. And the man you saw. He's not just some crazy neighbor. He's part of something much bigger." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, bigger?" Maggie's lips tightened. "There's a history in this town. People come here to escape. They think they're safe, but they never are. The man you saw. He's one of the Watchers. He and others like him, they've been here for years." I shook my head in disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is insane." "Why would anyone?" "Because it's not just a town," Maggie interrupted, her eyes darkening. "It's a trap. They lure people in. People like you. And then she stopped herself, her hands shaking slightly as she took a breath. "What happens to them?" I asked, almost afraid to know the answer. She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the door. "The Watchers. They don't just follow people. They drag them into the woods. And once you're in there, you're gone. The fog helps them, people think they're just lost, but it's not that simple. No one ever comes back." I leaned back, my stomach churning. "So what do I do? How do I get out?" Maggie stared at me for a long moment, her face grim. "There's no easy way out. Once they see you, once they know you've seen them, there's only one thing you can do." "What?" "Fight. If you don't, you're never leaving." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And don't trust anyone around here. Even the cops. They've been here for too long. They're part of it." I froze, my blood running cold. "What do you mean, the cops are part of it?" Maggie looked away, her eyes avoiding mine. "You're not the first to come here. You won't be the last." A loud crash from the front of the diner interrupted our conversation, followed by the sound of footsteps. I turned, my heart skipping a beat as the door swung open. Two figures stood in the doorway, tall, dark figures wearing the same worn-out jackets I had seen on the man earlier. They were staring straight at me, their eyes cold and empty. I knew, in that moment, that there was no escape. And it was too late to run. "Run," Maggie whispered urgently, her face pale. "Run now." But it was already too late. The door slammed shut with a force that made the diner's walls rattle. My heart thundered in my chest as I turned to see the two figures, their faces blank, almost ghostly. The silence that followed their entrance felt like it stretched on forever, oppressive, thick with tension. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed the hot coffee cup off the table and hurled it at one of them. The liquid splashed across the man's face, but it didn't seem to faze him at all. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and then, slowly, he smiled, no, grinned, a grotesque, unsettling smile that made my blood run cold. His teeth were too white, too sharp. Without another second to lose, I bolted for the door, shoving past Maggie, who seemed to be frozen in place. The moment I reached the threshold, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, heavy and fast. I didn't dare look back. The cold air slammed into me as I burst outside, the fog swirling around my feet like a dense blanket. My car was parked just down the street, but it felt miles away, and every step I took toward it seemed to echo with the sound of pursuing footsteps. Don't look back. Don't look back. The thought repeated over and over in my mind, but it was too late. I stole a quick glance over my shoulder. The two men were there, moving in sync like predators hunting their prey. Their strides were unnaturally long, their movements swift, and before I could react, they had closed the distance. One of them was almost on top of me. I felt something cold press against the back of my neck, and before I could even scream, I whipped around, using every ounce of strength to push him away. He stumbled back, his grin widening in a way that was almost inhuman, like he found this game amusing. I reached my car, but as I fumbled with my keys, the man reached out, grabbing my arm. His fingers were like steel, digging into my flesh. I screamed, yanking my arm free, and managed to get the door open. I slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door just as the other figure reached the car. My heart was pounding so loudly, I couldn't hear anything else, but I could feel his breath against the window, cold and foul. I slammed the car into gear, flooring the gas pedal, and the tires screeched as I sped away, swerving down the narrow road. The fog was so thick, I could barely see the headlights, but I didn't dare slow down. I had to get away. The figures didn't follow on foot. They didn't need to. A second later, a truck, a black pickup, roared to life behind me. The sound of its engine cut through the fog like a predator's growl. I tried to lose it, swerving wildly around sharp turns, hoping I could outpace them. But no matter how fast I drove, the truck stayed on my tail, its headlights burning brighter with every mile. I didn't know where I was going. The road was unfamiliar, winding and narrow, but all I could think was to keep moving, keep going. I didn't dare stop to think about what I'd just seen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to become another story, the kind of story no one would believe. The kind that ends with a missing person report, and no one ever finding out the truth. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The truck was gaining on me. And then, just as I turned a corner, the truck's headlights disappeared. For a second, I thought they had given up. But my relief was short-lived. The road ahead was blocked. Two figures, no, three now, stood in the middle of the road, their arms crossed in a perfect line. They were motionless, standing still as stone. They weren't even looking at me. They were staring past me, into the darkness, as if they were waiting for something, or someone, to arrive. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just inches from them. I didn't have time to process what was happening. I just reacted. I shifted the car into reverse, my hands shaking, but the second I tried to back up, I heard the unmistakable sound of the truck's engine revving to life. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was in front of me. I was trapped. I slammed the car into drive again, my mind racing. The figures in front of me weren't moving. I couldn't run into them, but I couldn't just sit there either. Panic was surging, and my vision blurred with terror. That's when I saw it. The glow of headlights, behind me. But they weren't just headlights. It was the truck. The same truck, but now, it was speeding down the road, its engine roaring louder than before. The man I had seen earlier, the one with the cold eyes, was driving it. I was cornered. There was nowhere to go. The truck skidded to a stop just a few feet behind me, blocking the road entirely. My pulse thundered in my ears. I was out of options. The men, the watchers, were closing in. I couldn't even get out of the car. The air seemed to close in on me, and I felt as though I was suffocating. The man stepped out of the truck, walking toward me slowly. I couldn't move. My body was frozen with fear. He stopped just short of the car, his face unreadable. He didn't smile this time. His eyes were locked on mine, empty, hollow. And then, in the deepest voice I'd ever heard, he spoke. You should have listened. Before I could respond, the other figures closed in, their footsteps loud and deliberate. I was surrounded. It was then that I understood. There was no escaping this. No one ever escapes. And as the first figure reached for the door handle, I realized that I had made a terrible mistake coming here. A mistake I would never be able to undo. Because when the fog rolls in, you don't just get lost. You disappear. I was suffocating, not just from the fear that twisted in my chest, but from the realization that I was trapped. No escape. No way out. The man in front of the truck stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate. His hand hovered just above the door handle, and I could see it clearly now, his eyes, those eyes that seemed to stare straight into my soul. They weren't human. They couldn't be. I tried to breathe, tried to calm my racing heart, but every muscle in my body screamed at me to move, to do something, anything. I couldn't just sit there and wait for them to pull me out of the car. But I was paralyzed by terror. He didn't open the door. Not immediately. Instead, he leaned down, his face inches from the window, and whispered something so softly, so coldly, that I could barely hear it over the pounding in my ears. "You're already dead." The word struck me like a punch to the gut. My pulse raced as the fog around me thickened, the world narrowing until there was nothing but the truck, the men, and me. My breath hitched, my thoughts scrambled. I couldn't die. I couldn't be one of those stories, another name to add to the list of missing people in this town. I had to do something. But what? The man, the watcher, straightened up, and for a moment, I thought he might leave me there. I thought the others might retreat into the fog, and I might still have a chance to escape. But then I saw it. From the corner of my eye, I saw something moving, something in the woods, something tall and dark. The air felt suddenly heavier, suffocating. I turned, barely able to see anything through the thick mist, but there it was, a figure. A large figure, taller than the men surrounding me. It was cloaked in darkness, and its presence sent an icy chill down my spine. It moved in a way that wasn't quite human, jerky, unnatural, like a shadow in the mist. I wasn't alone. And I wasn't just trapped in a fight for my life against these men. There was something far worse in these woods. The figure in the distance started walking toward us. It moved with purpose, its head tilted unnaturally to the side as if it was studying us. As it came closer, I saw what it really was. A creature. Not human. Not even close. It was massive, with limbs that stretched far longer than they should have. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and veins pulsed beneath it like snakes slithering under its skin. Its face. I don't know how to describe it. It was a thing of nightmares, eyes too wide, a mouth that opened far too wide with jagged teeth that seemed to glimmer even in the fog. And then, just as I thought it was going to tear through the air to devour me whole, one of the men, one of the watchers, raised his hand and stopped it. For a moment, everything froze. The creature stood still, its terrible eyes fixed on the man who commanded it. The watchers, they were in control. I didn't understand. How could they be controlling this thing? "Don't be stupid," the man said, his voice low, dangerous. "We're not killing her yet." I tried to make sense of it all, but the words seemed to get caught in my throat. I was a prisoner, a pawn, in whatever twisted game these people were playing. "You're part of this, aren't you?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and rage. You're not just neighbors. You're, what? Some kind of cult? A cult that lets these things loose?" The man smirked, his lips curling into that unsettling grin. "Not a cult. A family." And that's when the truth hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. These weren't just ordinary people. They had been here for generations. This town, this cabin, the fog, it was all part of a bigger design, something ancient and terrible that had existed long before I stumbled into this nightmare. The watchers weren't just following orders. They were the orders. They were the keepers of something old, something that had been here for centuries. They controlled the creatures. They controlled the fog. And I was the next sacrifice. A mark, a new soul to feed whatever dark power they worshipped. The creature loomed in the mist, still watching, waiting for its cue to strike. I could see the other men slowly closing in, as if I were prey waiting to be taken. I was about to scream, to beg for my life, but before the words could leave my mouth, I heard a loud crack, a gunshot, sharp and sudden. Everything went still. The creature flinched, stumbling back into the fog, its unnatural limbs jerking as if in pain. The watchers turned in surprise, their faces blank, confused. One of them looked toward the woods, his expression hardening. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a man in uniform. A police officer. I didn't know whether to feel relief or more terror. But when I saw the gun in his hand and the grim determination in his eyes, I knew. This wasn't a rescue. It was another part of the plan. The officer didn't speak to me. Instead, he walked toward the nearest watcher, his eyes locked on the creature in the distance. His movements were stiff, controlled. He raised his gun, aiming directly at the watcher's head. The shot rang out, echoing through the trees. The watcher crumpled to the ground, but the officer didn't hesitate. He moved on to the next one, and then another. I realized then that this officer was just another player in the game. Another piece to ensure that this town's twisted history continued. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the officer turning toward me, his face emotionless. "Get in the truck," he ordered. "You're coming with us." I had no choice. There was no fight left in me. I stumbled out of the car and followed the officer as he led me toward the truck. The creature in the distance didn't move. And just like that, I was pulled deeper into the nightmare. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The truck's engine roared to life, and I barely had time to process what was happening before the officer motioned for me to get in. My legs felt weak, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee into the woods. But I knew there was nowhere to go. The fog was thickening again, wrapping everything in a suffocating blanket. My vision blurred, and I could feel the weight of all the terror pressing on me like a physical force. I climbed into the back of the truck, barely registering the officer's movements as he got into the driver's seat. The truck began to move, cutting through the mist at a pace that made my stomach churn. We drove deeper into the forest, away from the town, and I realized that the landscape was growing unfamiliar. Every tree, every shadow felt more distorted, like we were traveling through another world. "Where are we going?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper, still too shaken to speak normally. The officer didn't look back, his face set in grim determination. "You're not going back. Not to that town, not to that cabin." I felt a knot form in my throat. "What do you mean? What is this? What's really happening?" He finally glanced over at me, his expression unreadable. "You've seen too much already. I can't let you go back. You'd never be the same. No one ever leaves here once they know what they're a part of." I turned away, my mind spinning, piecing together fragments of what I had seen, what Maggie had told me, and the horrors that had unfolded in front of my eyes. The watchers, the creatures, the police, they were all connected in some twisted, unholy way. But what did it mean for me? Was I still in danger? Were they going to? The truck jolted to a stop, interrupting my thoughts. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing a clearing up ahead. My heart pounded in my chest as the officer turned off the engine and opened the door. I followed him out, too frightened to protest. We were standing in front of what could only be described as a large, decrepit building. It looked like a barn, but with signs of age and neglect that made it seem almost like an ancient structure. The air around it felt thick and heavy, as if the very ground had absorbed years of suffering. I stared at it, my body frozen in place. "What is this place?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He motioned for me to follow him as he approached the building. The door was slightly ajar, and as we entered, I felt a chill sweep over me. The interior was dimly lit by flickering lanterns, casting long shadows on the walls. The place smelled like old wood, like death. I had no idea what was happening, but a horrible realization crept up on me. I was being led into the heart of whatever this was. "This is where it all begins," the officer said, his voice now cold, detached. "This is where it ends for everyone who comes here. You didn't just wander into a strange town. You came here because they brought you here." I didn't understand what he meant by that. But I didn't have time to ask. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I spun around to see two other figures stepping out of the shadows. One was another officer, and the other, a man, tall and gaunt, looked strangely familiar. The same cold eyes. The same expressionless face. The officer who had driven me here didn't say a word. He stepped back, letting the other two take their places around me. I was completely surrounded. "You thought you were running," the tall man said, his voice eerily calm, "but it's always been part of the plan. You were never meant to escape." My heart raced. "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" The man smiled, a sickeningly slow smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not about wanting anything. It's about need. This place, this town, it thrives on the fear, the energy of those who come here. They come to escape, to forget their troubles. But in the end, they give us something much more valuable, their souls." My stomach lurched as the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. "This is a sacrifice," I whispered, barely able to speak. The man nodded. "In a sense, yes. But it's more than that. You are not just a person who stumbled into a wrong place. You are a chosen one. You were brought here to serve a purpose." I could barely breathe, my vision narrowing as everything around me seemed to collapse. This whole thing had been planned from the start. From the moment I booked that cabin. From the moment I stepped foot in that town. They'd been watching me. And now, they were going to take me, body and soul. "Why me?" I whispered, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and disbelief. The officer stepped forward, his expression still stone cold. "Because you saw. You saw too much. And once you see, there's no going back. You are part of it now. And once we bring you to the others, you'll become just like the rest." I didn't know what else to say. The weight of it all crushed me. There was no escape. The creature, the watchers, the officers, they were all part of it. There was no hope. No way to get out of this alive. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, the man with the cold eyes stepped forward and placed his hand on my shoulder. His grip was like iron, and I couldn't move. He spoke one last time. "We'll take you now. But don't worry, you'll understand soon enough." As they led me toward the back of the barn, I felt the life drain from my body. I had been chosen, yes. But there was no salvation for me here. The fog closed in again, thick and suffocating, and I understood, with sickening clarity, that there would be no escape. The endgame had arrived. And I was its final piece.